Hi, this is episode 2 in my new video series on boundaries, and today I'm going to be talking about the emotional bank account. This is a concept that was originally coined by Stephen Covey, but today I'm going to talk about how it's relevant in regard to boundaries and in regard to having healthy relationships in our lives. So the most important thing to understand is that whenever we enter into a new relationship with someone, that we are essentially opening a joint emotional bank account with them. And whenever a relationship is new and just beginning, that joint emotional bank account has a zero balance. And our goal is over the course of the life of the relationship that we have many more deposits in this shared emotional bank account than we have withdrawals. So what makes a deposit in the shared emotional bank account? A deposit requires that in any interaction or activity or shared experience in the relationship, that both individuals feel honored and acknowledged and heard and respected. Okay, so in order for it to be a deposit in a shared or joint emotional bank account, both individuals have to feel that the experience or interaction was positive for them. Now, withdrawals are a little trickier because a withdrawal happens anytime even just one of the individuals in a relationship feels maybe dishonored or disrespected or unacknowledged, somehow feels negative about the interaction. Then it's a withdrawal from the shared joint bank account. All right, so a deposit requires that both people feel good. A withdrawal only requires that one individual feel sort of slighted or cheated in the interaction. Now, one thing I want you to notice is that deposits don't have anything to do with whether we agree with the other person, whether we share their opinions or their beliefs, anything like that. It has everything to do with how the interactions and the way that we interact with each other makes each of us feel. Each of us also has a private personal emotional bank account because obviously we have relationships with ourselves as well. And if we are not good about making regular, ample deposits into our own emotional bank account through self-care and practices that feed ourselves, then we're going to be very prone to try to take withdrawals out of our shared and joint accounts with the other people in our lives. Because our own emotional bank account is maybe in the red. Now, unfortunately, if we let other people, also the other person in a relationship, take regular withdrawals out of the shared account, this too will cause the joint or shared account to be in the red. And unfortunately, when that happens, sometimes we are tempted to take emotional reserves out of our personal emotional bank accounts and put them into the shared or joint account in order to try to save the relationship. And if we do that often enough, then, and the others may be taking withdrawals out of the shared emotional bank account consistently, then unfortunately, pretty soon, both accounts are in the red, or at least at zero balance. And when that happens, that's usually when most people finally get to a place where they're like, oh my gosh, I got to put up a boundary, right? And it's a wall because, you've got to put stop action, on that account. There's no money, no reserves left to do anything with. And so again, that's when most people finally get to a point where they realize that they need to put some boundaries up in a relationship. By then, it's really much too late. The secret to avoiding this scenario is to get much better at identifying and acknowledging what is a deposit and what is a withdrawal in each of our shared joint emotional bank accounts with other people. But this can be trickier than it sounds like, because if the interaction feels like a deposit to me, but it feels like a withdrawal to you, then those two are going to void each other out, and there's really a zero-sum gain on that interaction. But because most of us are not mind readers, the only way that we can really know whether an interaction is a withdrawal or deposit in our shared emotional bank account with someone is to ask and to communicate. Now, when we do this, it's actually not something that most people do. Most people don't spend time to ask or even take a minute to ask, how does somebody else feel about the interaction or the exchange that happened in a relationship. So if we take the time to do this, to actually ask the people in our lives how they're feeling about certain things in the relationship and certain things that we do, particularly in a relationship, or the way that we're behaving, this will be so surprising to them, and they'll probably be so touched by it that most of the time other people are going to reciprocate that. And that's a great pathway to healthier relationship when those lines of communication open up. But there's a couple tricks to that working, even if we're trying. And the first is that we have to be able to acknowledge and understand and recognize how we feel. Some people aren't even very good about that. So if we don't know how we're feeling in the moment, there's not really any way that we're going to be able to communicate that to the other person. So we have to know how we're feeling, we have to recognize how we're feeling, and then we also have to be willing to communicate that to the other person and to communicate it in a way that they understand, right? And that can be really challenging and feels really scary to a lot of people. Is like, I don't know how to talk about that, and that makes me uncomfortable. But one of the things that spending time with horses has taught me is that we make this way, way harder than it really has to be. Because everything we need to communicate with somebody else about how things are going in the relationship and how we feel about certain interactions in the relationship all comes down to the universal language of yes and no. What are we going to say yes to, and what are we going to say no to? All right? And if you are in my retreat on boundaries right now, that's what we're going to be diving into really deep this week, is looking at, for each of you, what are you going to say yes to in your life, in certain relationships in your life, in certain situations in your life, and what are you going to say no to? All right? So I look forward to diving into that this week. And for those of you who aren't in the retreat and may just be watching this video later, I hope that the information I've shared about the emotional bank account gives you a new way of thinking about your role in relationships and in determining boundaries in a relationship to be healthier. Thanks.